Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm DK Roster. Now, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries is dedicated to promoting sustainable agriculture, land use, and fisheries practice for the economic and social development of our nation. Now, its line minister recently had cause to issue a warning against the illegal import of livestock. Chief Veterinary Officer Dr. Lana Gyan, she joins us to share more. Dr. Gyan, thank you so much for joining us. So the premise of the conversation is about illegal importation of livestock. Give us a definition so we can start from that premise. Thank
you. Okay, so the illegal importation of livestock is basically the intentional movement of animals across borders without giving consideration to the internationally established rules for trade in that animal or animal product. Now, what does that mean? Just to break it down, it just means that you're moving animals across borders without the proper checks and balances.
Thank you so much. And this, like I said, the entire conversation, it follows an incident that saw 43 animals apprehended during an attempt to smuggle them into the country via an illegal entry point in the carcass. So what is the procedure to treat with these animals that would have been, these 43 animals that would have been confiscated?
Okay, so I guess we can take maybe like a step back before we even get there, because something that we need to understand is different countries have different considerations when it comes to animal health. Okay, so one country may be living with certain diseases that Trinidad and Tobago does not have and we do not want. So when we are talking about the illegal entry of animals, we do not have a context point. The ministry, we being the ministry, we don't know where these animals are coming from, if they're sick, what they're carrying. And it's important to understand that even though they look outwardly healthy, they may still be shedding certain viruses, or they may still be carrying diseases that we do not want. So when these animals land on our shores with that context and without any prior notification, we have a couple options. We can send them back to the country of origin. We can quarantine them in official quarantine stations and then do the needful tests and then decide what we're doing with them after, if we're returning them to the owner, if we're slaughtering them, or we slaughter at the point of entry, right? Humanely euthanize them. Okay, if in this instance, we chose to euthanize them at the point of entry because in our risk determination, we determined that the risk was a little too high to transport these animals to, another area, to keep them around, because we don't know where they came from. We don't know what they're bringing. And our goal is to secure our national livestock. So that's what we did.
And with that, it makes me want to ask about consequences as well. And I say that because it's not one person that was bringing the animals in. I mean, there was a routine patrol and there was a tractor trailer that was seen trying to pull a cart on shore, and there were several individuals involved, and they scattered when they saw police coming towards them. If any of these individuals are caught, what are some of those consequences? What are some of the things that are in there to bring them to bear?
So the act that we operate under is the Animal Diseases Importations Health and Welfare Act, right? That gives us our legislative powers. And within that act, there's the section on offenses, which states that if you illegally import an animal, you can face a fine of up to $200,000 and 5 years imprisonment. But you have to be found guilty on summary conviction. So that is the difficulty there. You have to actually catch the person. They have to go through the legal system, be found guilty and all of that. And in this case, as you would have mentioned, we didn't catch them.
It makes me want to know, who are some of the stakeholders involved to help kind of implement that law? So naturally, when you talk about catch, you're thinking about TTPS. Are there any others? Coast Guard?
Yeah, so it was actually Customs and Excise who would have alerted us to this. So we lean heavily on our border agencies to work with us in the MALF on these types of exercises, because you would understand that a department of 15 vets cannot be at every single illegal entry point, right? So we tend to work with Customs and Excise, Coast Guard, TTPS, those would be, and yeah, and those would be our partner agencies for the border patrol. So they call us in when they realize that they have consignments that contain animals or animal products. And I think this might be a good place to plug. We're talking about animals, right? And you always have the visual in the news of live animals. So you have the pictures of the sheep and goats and the cows, but actually animal products is equally as important. So there are things like cheese and honey and meat that tend to come in with it as well that are equally, they carry an equal risk.
And that's one, and I'm glad you said that because that's one of the questions I wanted to ask, whether or not it's just a matter of, to your experience, what are some of the things that you see? Is it just small ruminants? Because I'm also thinking logistics of how it is we're going to be smuggling if we're doing that. So it's not just small ruminants. You're saying because you mentioned cows as well. What are some of those other things?
Listen, it's amazing. I've been on the beach in Cedros at 1 a.m. when we're calling with customs, and just to see how these animals are smuggled. I think in that case, it was a couple of years ago, it was about 5 or 6 cows, like I'm talking full-size cattle in pirogues, and to see the poor animal welfare. And this is another thing that we really want to get across to the public. Yes, we are talking about public health and animal health, but there's a lot to say for animal welfare. These animals are treated extremely poorly. They're tied up, they're confined, they break limbs in transit. Some of them die from heat stress if they're transported during the day. It's a really horrible sight to see these animals suffer immensely on the way here. And I mean, the public really needs to consider that when you're thinking about this also.
And
So it's cattle. That was an example with cattle. And as I said, wildlife is another one. So, I mean, the pet bird trade has been going on for a long time and it's still thriving. Pet birds, any other type of wildlife species. We're talking about wild meats. I know the wild meat trade, it's a real thing that happens also. I would have mentioned cheese, honey. I've even seen on the boat with the sheep and goat saltfish, anything you could think about, sausages, anything.
and I'm kind
You look shocked.
I'm kind of speechless. I was That's very different from sheep and goat, but even I'm trying to visualize. I'm literally trying to visualize a cow on a pirogue and how that
It's not
happened.
something that a reasonable thinking person would ever visualize. It's really horrible. They're tied up, all their limbs, obviously, because you don't want them thrashing in the boat. They're really confined on top each other. Sometimes the animals are piled up on top each other and they would suffocate. That's why they break limbs. It's not proper animal welfare at all.
And what are some of the things that individuals, people can look out for? I know sometimes people would be buying animals, possibly wholesale and alive. What are some of the things that individuals should look out for? Is it papers when purchasing
Right.
animals like this?
So there are a couple things, right? I think on an individual level, at least asking the seller for the health records of the animals is a good place that you can start, because an established farmer is going to have the health records of the animals on the farms, like things like when did our anti-rabies unit come and vaccinate them, if they've been vaccinated for anything else, if the government vet has come on the station, has your herd been treated for anything. And a farmer should be taking these records and they should be made available to you as a buyer. Secondly, that notwithstanding, that doesn't mean that the Ministry of Agriculture, we are currently working on a national animal identification database, which will greatly help this. Basically meaning that we want to have a centralized database where we can have all these animal identification numbers or markers available. So we verify who is a national animal and who is, potentially smuggled. And that is going to help immensely, but it's going to take a while. We've just started. So we're hopeful that that can come off the ground soon.
And that's definitely something to look forward to. And is it a matter, do you know whether or not the price is very different? So because
Yes.
if that is the case, how come they sell it so cheap? Well, so to ask those simple questions.
Yeah. So, a simple question, why is this happening? Because the demand is there. So, I was told that one of these live goats may sell for like $900, whereas a local goat may sell for 1,500. So you see there is a difference in the price. However, you as a consumer, you need to ask, well, why? And the answer to that question is because these animals, they may not be healthy. They may not be something that our local health authorities are going to pass as fit for human consumption, right?
And in
There's
terms
a
of talking
reason.
about that fit for human consumption, I don't want to try to squeeze this response. So we'll speak about the risks when we return from the break. We're speaking with Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Lana Gyan. Stay with us, we'll return with more. Welcome back. We are having a spirited conversation with the Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Lana Gyan, and we're looking at the issue of illegal animal importation. Just before we took the break, we're saying, yes, it's one thing to say, okay, well, this price is very different from this price, but a large part of the difference in price is because there are so many other risks that are involved. So in terms of those risks that would redound to individuals and I guess the population at whole. Read and spell for me, please, Dr. Gyan.
Yes, so I think, in order to understand why a local farmer may charge a certain price, you have to understand there are lots of inputs that go in to raising that animal, from feed to medication to prophylactic treatment like vaccinations, right? And then there's also the additional cost. They use the abattoirs and they get the meat inspected, and all of these things are costs or inputs to our farmers, and that will determine the price that they charge you as a consumer. But you have to understand that these things are put in place because the end product that you will consume has been verified that it is healthy to consume and you are safe to eat it. However, when you purchase these animals that we do not know where it's coming from, we do not know if they're coming with any diseases. And now these diseases, I know we're speaking about veterinary health, so we're thinking animal diseases, but you need to understand that there's some diseases that can actually be contracted by humans, and they're called zoonotic diseases. I'm sure you've heard about salmonella. There's avian influenza going on right now in the world that can be transmitted from poultry to people, well, live birds to people. Yeah, so there are lots of risks that consuming this meat or consuming these animals would take on you as a consumer.
And you're saying that, Dr. Gyan, and I'm thinking of the visual of scores of animals being euthanized because they were suffering from, is it hand foot?
Foot and mouth disease?
Yes.
So foot and mouth disease is different from hand, foot and
Well,
mouth disease,
yeah.
right?
Because there was one that scores of farms who were just culling animals because they didn't want to, they want to save
Yes,
the rest of the stock. And
yes,
that also raises the point of, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, this can be harmful to the individual consuming it, what can it do to the stock that is in Trinidad and Tobago if an
yes.
infected animal comes in and starts that spread?
Yes, so you have to understand that these diseases, they can, depends on what the disease is. They can either decimate your entire population of animals. They can create a decrease in your productivity. So you brought up foot and mouth disease. That disease tends to go through herds pretty quickly, and it reduces the production, meaning that the animal may not gain weight in the way it normally does. It's not going to produce milk in the way it normally does. You may have abortions, that kind of thing. And then ultimately, the ultimate goal at the ultimate consequence is that it affects our food security. So you need to think about this. If you wipe out all the sheep and goat that we have in South, where are you as a consumer going to get your sheep and goat from? There's going to be none. And that is a huge risk.
And I'm thinking about the farmers. So just the idea of thinking of small ruminants, so farmers like Shiraz Khan and others who are doing the things that they're supposed to by
Yes.
the book, following the instructions and obeying the letter and principle of the law. And then because somebody wants to take a chance and say, okay, well, I could get this somewhere else, Peter pay for Paul and Paul pay for all, as it were.
Yes, and you know what happens. I guess it might be a cultural thing. You do things once, you do things twice. You say, I've been doing this. I know this guy's been doing this for 10 years, and it's always been fine. It's fine. These government people, they overreact. But the one time, I just want to stress, the one time that something happens, it's going to be huge. And the consequences of it, it's so far reaching. It's just beyond you as an individual.
And I know some farmers are saying that the different types, and yes, I'm kind of keeping on small ruminants because that's the picture that we saw in the press release and stuff. But some farmers are able to tell just by looking that
Yes.
this is from a breed that has been grown uh here in Trinidad and Tobago. Or let me say differently, sometimes they'll be able to look at something and say, nah, this is not from here.
Yes. So,
Are there some of those other things? So in addition to papers and making sure, okay, well, it's gone through these processes that you're supposed to have, are there other things that, and I think in farmers in general,
so
can be
the
able
thing
to look
is,
out for?
back in the day, our farmers would know the breeds that our livestock stations would produce, or the breeds that circulate in the local herd. And then when you bring breeds from outside that we do not historically have, you can look at them and know, well, this isn't a Trini sheep or goat. However, because now this has been happening for so long, some of these breeds have been established or they've mixed with our herd, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell who is local and who is not local just by identifying the breed or the look of the animal. So that is making it even more difficult now. And that is an even bigger reason for the animal ID system that we need to implement.
Point taken. But with all the talk about wrongdoing and the consequences and the risks, let's talk about the right way to do it in terms of how would someone go about legally importing livestock?
Okay, so we can start with the act that I mentioned earlier, the Animal Diseases Act. It is on Google. You can Google it. It's on the Ministry of Agriculture's website, Trade, also Legal Affairs, right? Within that act, there are certain schedules at the back that speak to the approved countries that you can import certain animals and animal products from, right? So there are schedules that speak to cattle and sheep and goats and even the carcasses of those animals. Secondly, you don't have to do all of that as the public. You can just contact the Ministry of Agriculture, contact my office directly, and you put in your request. You talk to us on phone or you email us and tell us that you wish to import small ruminants from X country, and we will guide you on the things that you need to do so, or even if the country is approved or not approved. So we need to have those conversations. You need to reach out to us directly.
And in terms of reaching out, I know that the ministry has a website. This is agriculture.gov.tt.
Yes.
And in terms of the division, talk to me about that. This is animal production and health, and I'm
Yes.
actually pulling it up while we're looking at it. And the contacts and the contact number, oh, 625-1473.
Yeah, or 625-5997. You can email my office at cvo@gov.tt. We also have a Gmail account, which is aphmalmr@gmail.com. And if you don't get through to any one of those, you can call the ministry directly at their head office and they will put you on to us.
So we want to thank you, Dr. Gyan, because we're looking at the Animal Production and Health Division, providing quality goods and services cost effectively and reliably to the satisfaction of customers. Let me just put in that plug. So people, we know what it is we're dealing with, and we have a better idea, because sometimes people say, I didn't know. So, and I didn't know that it could go so far, to your point, because you're doing this all the time, and it's just the one time that this thing happened and all fall down. So we want to thank you very much, Chief Veterinary Officer, Dr. Lana Gyan. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, DK Rosta. Thank you so much for joining us.